Chadwick, shut up.
Parents around the country are speaking out against woke curriculums as more schools begin embracing critical race theory.
Critical race theory.
Critical race theory.
Or CRT for short.
What exactly is critical race theory? Well, if you work in the government or in corporate America, you probably already know what it is.
It is a Marxist ideology that they are trying to now put into classrooms and put into the workplace.
Critical race theory says every white person is a racist. Critical race theory says America is fundamentally racist and irredeemably racist. Critical race theory seeks to turn us against each other.
Make black people and white people hate one another.
Hate each other. It's a tragedy in that way.
Whether or not that's the working definition at Yale Law, it doesn't matter. I don't care. We don't care.
They are indoctrinating our children, trying to teach our children to hate our country.
This is child abuse. It's abuse of everyone, really.
You're not imagining this, and no one loves your children more than you. It is now up to you to fight for it.
Not only do parents want it out of their kids' curriculum, they want to oust the school board members who are pushing it on them.
CRT! No CRT!
We've seen yelling, screaming, protesting, and even some arrests. So far, 9 states have officially banned critical race theory. And Jillian, the summer is still young.
This is probably a lost cause. One thing that conservative media is really good at is taking advantage of data voids, which means finding a topic or subject that no one is really talking about, and then talking about it incessantly. Critical race theory has been taught in American law schools for almost half a century at this point. But look how much people cared about it before, and look at it now. This is a smart propaganda trick, because it makes it so that anyone looking for more information about this scary thing they saw on Fox News is just gonna find more bullshit that confirms their fears. Search for critical race theory on YouTube right now, and the top results are not from experts or academics. They're from PragerU, Ben Shapiro, and dipshits who'd never even heard of critical race theory until 5 minutes before they went on stage to talk about it.
I'm going to say this as bluntly and as honestly as I can. Critical race theory is the most racist thing that is being spread in popular life in America. It is no different than the teaching of the KKK.
Sure, why not? That creates what I like to call a dipshit feedback loop, where algorithms start recommending garbage to feed their audience, and grifters start producing garbage to feed the algorithm. One of the top results on YouTube right now is a video from this random musician titled "Why I Hate Critical Race Theory."
I hate critical race theory because I hate racism.
Sure, why not? This woman very obviously does not know what critical race theory is, but her video got picked up by YouTube's algorithm. So now, everything she makes is about critical race theory. It's become her whole shtick. Bullshit breeds more bullshit. Also, this weird thing keeps happening where she gets interrupted by her meatloaf timer while she's recording.
Offensive, and I'm not advocating. The meatloaf is ready. 1 second. As art. There goes my meatloaf again. 1 second.
Girl, are you mainlining meatloaf over there? Edit that out. You look like an amateur. To make matters worse, critical race theory is kind of the ideal target for a right-wing smear campaign. I mean, talk about bad branding. Can you imagine 3 words more terrifying to the average Fox News viewer than critical theory?
Race?
Plus, CRT was created by law professors who were writing for other law professors. So if you want to look at the original documents explaining what it is, you're gonna have to read through articles like Brown v. Board of Education and the Interest Convergence Dilemma, or Race, Reform and Retrenchment, Transformation and Legitimation in Anti-Discrimination Law. Do you want to read that shit? Do you think Meatloaf Girl read it? Uh-oh. The result is a media environment where the people talking the loudest about this topic are the ones who know the least about it. If you're watching this video, I imagine you've already heard or maybe even internalized a pretty wild first impression of what CRT is. So when someone comes along and tries to tell you that that's not what critical race theory is, that most of what you've heard is utter bullshit, and that these people are intentionally lying to try to scare and manipulate you, it probably sounds hard to believe. And it doesn't help that that someone is a Mountain Dew covered wood nymph who's experimenting with wearing dangly earrings in his mid-30s. Is this the face of someone you can trust? Is it? Like I said, at this point, this is probably a lost cause. But I promised this dead guy that I would keep fighting losing battles. So, for all you free thinkers out there, here goes nothing. Critical race theory. What is it? Who has it? And most importantly, which lever do I pull to be crushed by a safe? I first learned about critical race theory when I was a freshman in high school, getting ready for the Florida State Novice Debate Championship. And please, do not masturbate to this photo unless you absolutely have to. I was after school one day digging through this closet of research that had been left behind by former debaters. And in the back of that closet, I found this old haunted expando folder titled CLS, Critical Legal Studies. I know. Pretty sweet. Critical legal studies is an intellectual movement started by a group of law professors in the 1970s who came together to argue that the law is never truly neutral. We think of the legal system as this objective, rational rulebook, but in reality, it's much messier than that, full of contradictions and gray areas that humans have to resolve. When the Supreme Court makes a 5-4 decision, for example, looking at the same exact facts and coming to two wildly different conclusions, it's not because half of the justices have made a mistake. It's because a smart lawyer can use the law to justify just about whatever they want. Terms like due process, probable cause, equal protection, they don't mean anything on their own. They are given meaning by judges, juries, and lawyers who interpret those terms based on their own values and biases. And CLS argued that those biases are not random. Because the legal system is maintained by privileged elites, people who can go to expensive law schools, work fancy clerkships, and get appointed to high office, the law tends to reflect their interests. The American legal system, for example, cares a lot about trademarks, contracts, and property rights, but it says very little about your right to food, housing, or healthcare. Why? Not because property rights were given to us by God, but because the elites who create and interpret those rights are much less worried about you starving on the street than they are about you trying to take their shit. The primary function of the legal system, then, is not to fairly resolve disputes. It's to protect those who are already in power, to normalize exploitation and inequality by dressing it up in fancy court decisions, precedents, and legal doctrines. You're not mad that corporate billionaires are buying up local elections. You just hate the First Amendment. You're not mad that your boss can fire you for no goddamn reason. You just hate the freedom of contract. Why do you hate the freedom of contract? Why do you hate America? CLS concluded that the law is not a constraint on politics. The law is politics. A way for the ruling class to exert power while appearing neutral. That's critical legal studies. Now, in the back of that haunted expando folder, there was a second, even smaller folder labeled CRT, Critical Race Theory. Sweet! Critical race theory began when a group of non-white law professors saw the work that CLS had done and said, yeah, no shit. The law does reflect the interests of the powerful. And one great example of that is when it comes to, race. These professors were living in the aftermath of the civil rights movement, and they were noticing that despite legal victories like the Civil Rights Act and Brown v. Board, life for Black Americans was not changing all that quickly. And the example that really helped me understand this when I was a teenager is what happened in Detroit. After Brown v. Board, the Detroit public school system was legally required to desegregate. The problem was, it couldn't. Detroit's white population had already started leaving, preferring to move to the suburbs rather than live alongside their Black neighbors in the inner city, a phenomenon often referred to as white flight. Black families in Detroit could not make the same move. They often had less money thanks to years of racist zoning and redlining practices, and those who did move to the suburbs were frequently harassed by police and city officials to stop them from staying.
As the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan told a reporter, "Black people can't get in here. We watch it. Every time we hear of a Negro moving in, we respond quicker than you do to a fire. It's known among our people, and it's known among the Negroes here."
It's fine, I'm sure he was just a bad apple.
He was the mayor for 35 years.
The result was a system of integrated schools, but segregated school districts, with white students clustered in wealthier districts outside the city, and non-white students in poorer schools in Detroit's center. Separate and unequal. In 1970, a district judge saw what was happening and said, all right, nice try, you dick tits. But this obviously violates the purpose of Brown v. Board. the judge ordered the creation of a busing program that would take some black students from the inner city and some white students from the suburbs and send them to each other's schools. If the parents won't integrate, the kids will. Problem solved. But as you might imagine, the whites were not thrilled about this.
My daughter will not be on that bus. She will not be in a parochial school. She will be home.
Protests broke out across the state, with white families arguing that the busing program violated their rights. The KKK started blowing up school buses to deter people from using them, and white activists started going on TV and arguing that actually, it was the busing program that violated Brown v. Board.
You see, we are told on one hand to be colorblind, and this is how I have lived and how I have raised my children. To bus them for race only is simply, again, drawing attention to the differences in the races, and I disapprove of this.
You kind of have to admire the chutzpah of this lady. She is literally using the logic of Brown v. Board to defend segregation. I mean, who would buy this argument? Who would buy this argument? In 1974, the Supreme Court intervened, and in a 5-4 decision, sided with the whites, claiming that because the school districts were not explicitly drawn with racist intent, they did not violate Brown v. Board, and the busing program would have to end. In his dissent, the one black justice on the court, Thurgood Marshall, wrote,
"Under such a plan, white and Negro students will not go to school together. Instead, Negro children will continue to attend all Negro schools. The very evil that Brown was aimed at will not be cured, but will be perpetuated."
He was right. Nearly 70 years after Brown v. Board, America's school system remains deeply segregated. And Detroit, in particular, has some of the most clearly segregated school districts in the country. Critical race theorists saw what was happening in places like Detroit and said, see, this is exactly the kind of shit we hate. Reforms like the Civil Rights Act and Brown v. Board were good at stopping really obvious displays of racism, but for most black and brown Americans, racial inequality is much more subtle than that. Baked into decades of legal decisions, economic policies, and policing practices that look neutral on paper, but end up treating racial groups very differently. The civil rights movement, CRT argued, had put too much faith in things like anti-discrimination laws, and too much faith in the legal system's ability to correct its own biases. If we're serious about dealing with racial inequality, it's not enough to say, don't think about race and pray for the best. Instead, we have to think critically about how our laws and institutions might be impacting people of color differently, even while they claim to be colorblind. 2 more things about critical race theory, and then I promise class is dismissed. Chadwick, stop packing your shit before the bell.
No!
1, CRT is not super interested in individual intent. Many of the white families that left Detroit were doing it to get away from black people, but some of them were probably just following their friends, and others were probably just trying to put their kids in the best possible schools, which just happen to be in the all-white suburbs. Critical race theorists argue that we spend way too much time worrying about who is or is not privately holding racist beliefs. Instead, we should focus on systems of power and ask why they might be treating racial groups differently. Like, why are black people so much more likely to be charged for drug possession despite using drugs at a similar rate as whites? Why are black families so much more likely to be denied a home loan than other racial groups? Why do major highways keep getting built right down the middle of black communities that get too close to white suburbs? And isn't it weird that the legal system in charge of answering these questions is still overwhelmingly run by people who've never experienced racial discrimination? Remember, CRT was created by nerdy law professors, so they're less interested in is Karen racist, and more interested in why do Karens tend to experience the legal system so differently than their non-white peers. 2, CRT is not a set of solutions. Many black activists in Detroit believed that busing was the best way to deal with segregation, but many of them did not, arguing that the city would be better off just investing more money into majority black schools. Critical race theorists often disagree about what to do about racial inequality. And that's because CRT is not an answer to a problem, it's just a way of understanding it. Or to borrow a grad school term, it's a lens through which we can better understand how inequality works and why quick fixes might not.
Critical race theory just says let's pay attention to what has happened in this country and how what has happened in this country is continuing to create differential outcomes so we can become that country that we say we are.
Chadwick. Eat shit! That's basically it. I don't mean to sell critical race theory short. Lots of brilliant people have done incredible work documenting how the legal system treats Black and brown people differently. And over the past 50 years, the lessons of CRT have expanded beyond the law into fields like economics and sociology. One area it's been especially influential is in education, where teachers and school administrators have taken the lens of CRT to ask how their own policies might be affecting their Black and brown students. Like, why are Black kids more likely to be expelled for the same behavioral issues as white kids? Why is it that school dress codes are so often used to punish girls with traditionally Black hairstyles? And isn't it weird that so many of our textbooks are written by white historians who teach us that racial discrimination basically ended in the 60s? I mean, we were all taught about Brown v. Board, right? But were you ever taught about the Detroit case that basically overturned it? Do you think Meatloaf Girl was? But whether it's in the law or education, the basic lesson of CRT is the same. As much as we may want to be colorblind, America's institutions often aren't. And if we're able to acknowledge that, we'll be better at finding solutions that make sure everyone actually does get a fair shot.
Oh, my nip was coming out.
Now at this point, you're probably having one of two reactions to critical race theory. Some of you are probably thinking, this is bullshit, nobody actually cares about race anymore. You liberals want to make everything about race so you can guilt white people into voting for you. If Black people are struggling, it's because Black people are making bad choices. This is just cultural Marxism disguised as Black Lives Matter so you can gain your true plan for an anti-white revolution. And honestly, if that's how you feel, I guess all I can really say is, you're right. We don't believe a word of this shit. We know racism ended in the 60s. We're just making this up as we go along. Pulling decades of legal research and peer-reviewed academic articles directly out of our asses. Why? Because we're bored, that's why. And we want to spend the rest of our miserable lives on this dying planet arguing about reverse racism with Ben Shapiro fans who skipped their intro to sociology class because they thought it sounded gay. We have spent the past 40 years using critical race theory to teach Americans to hate white people. And somehow, nobody noticed until 1 month before the 2020 election. But I fear you're too late, free thinker. For now, I have the orb. And with it, nothing can stop me from building the culturally Marxist utopia of my dreams. Behold, white men, and let me show you the true meaning of playing the victim. The rest of you are probably wondering, what is the big fucking deal? How did CRT go from an obscure legal theory to they're teaching our kids to hate white people? It's a good question, and one that I thought would be fun to answer together. But if we're gonna do this, I should slip into something a little bit more comfortable. It's called fashion, bitch. Look it up. Sorry I called you a bitch. I've been in a really weird headspace lately. Welcome to my living room, the place where I like to get obscenely stoned and stay up till 4 in the morning watching Chopped reruns.
Just get out 5 minutes.
I'm never gonna set. Put it in the blast chiller.
Is she making meatloaf?
Unfortunately, today's activities will be a bit less relaxing, because for the past few months, and against the clear recommendations of the CDC, I have been plummeting down the right-wing rabbit hole to make sense of the panic over CRT. And having returned to the surface, I would like to present my findings to you now. Fair warning, what I'm about to show you is unbelievably stupid. So if at any point you start to feel hopeless or overwhelmed, just know that this ride only stops for emergencies. And in 2021, despair over the collapsing state of American empire is not an emergency! Let's roll. So, as you can see from this ugly-ass chart, the phrase critical race theory basically never appeared on Fox News over the past 10 years. But that all changed in September of 2020, thanks to an appearance from this little guy, a man named Christopher Rufo. Who is Christopher Rufo? I'm glad you asked. Rufo is a right-wing political operative who likes to pretend to be a serious journalist, the kind of grifter who'll go after any gimmick or pseudo-scandal he thinks will get him attention. In 2017, he sued the city of Seattle over its tax on the ultra-wealthy, despite being too broke to qualify for the tax himself. In 2018, he launched a blink and you'd miss it campaign for Seattle City Council, during which he complained about the homeless and then almost immediately dropped out, claiming he was being bullied by online leftists. But in September of 2020, Rufo pulled off his biggest stunt yet, appearing on Tucker Carlson Tonight to warn the public about the spread of a dangerous new ideology.
Tucker, this is something I've been investigating for the last 6 months, and what I've discovered is that critical race theory has become the default ideology of the federal bureaucracy and is now being weaponized against the American people.
Pretty shocking, huh? If true, Rufo's evidence that CRT was infiltrating the federal government was a handful of anti-racism trainings at places like the Treasury Department and FBI, which were designed to teach employees about concepts like white privilege and microaggressions.
Today is Diversity Day. Someone's going to come in and talk to us about diversity, something that I've been pushing, and corporate mandated it.
If you've ever worked in a corporate office, you've probably sat through one of these trainings before. They're usually pretty boring. But according to Rufo, these trainings were part of a much more radical anti-white agenda.
Conservatives need to wake up that this is an existential threat to the United States, and the bureaucracy, even under the Trump administration, is now being weaponized against core traditional American values.
Now, even if you are a straight-up racist, there are two obvious problems with this segment. For one, racial sensitivity trainings are not critical race theory. They're kind of the opposite. One of the main arguments of CRT is that we focus too much on individual biases and not enough on systems of power. So many critical race theorists, including me, are deeply skeptical of these kinds of trainings. Not just because they're cringy and don't really work, but because they can distract from bigger issues. Like, who cares if the FBI is hosting an anti-racism workshop while their agents are targeting and harassing Black Lives Matter activists? Who cares how woke the Treasury Department is while the tax code still caters to wealthy white taxpayers? Obviously, Rufo's target audience does not care about any of this, but if your issue is really with woke sensitivity trainings, critical race theory probably agrees with you. The bigger issue, though, is that Rufo is a goddamn liar. The Washington Post looked into Rufo's reporting and found that his claims were either not supported by the evidence or stretched beyond the facts. The Treasury Department did not tell its employees that all white people were racist, as Rufo had claimed. Nor did the FBI tell its employees that straight white men are at the top of a pyramid of evil, for Christ's sake. These were boilerplate, voluntary HR workshops. Rufo was just making shit up and then calling it critical race theory to scare gullible white people. And on that night, he had a very specific gullible white person in mind.
I'd like to make it explicit, the President and the White House, to immediately issue an executive order abolishing critical race theory trainings from the federal government. But it's time to take action and destroy it within his own administration.
You can probably guess what happened next. The next morning, Rufo got a phone call from Trump's chief of staff, and a few days later, Trump issued an executive order banning federal contractors from offering racial sensitivity trainings.
Critical race theory teaches that America is an evil country. I will not allow federal taxpayer dollars to be used to spread anti-American propaganda.
This is how most Americans first heard about critical race theory. Not from a law professor in a classroom, but from one con man copying another con man in a desperate attempt to get reelected. And thankfully, it didn't work. Trump still lost, America had a quick little race riot, and for the most part, people moved on. You can see a big dip in Fox News' mentions of CRT in the weeks after the election. And Rufo got kind of quiet too. The most noteworthy thing he did in December was tweet, "I'm at the barbershop, one of the last domains of traditional masculinity. Blue-collar men, macho talk, slick fades, sleeve tattoos, turn-of-the-century prints, lady trouble, and anti-lockdown sentiments. The haircut is the rationale, but not the meaning." It's a little gay, Chris. Could everybody just grow up and be gay already? I'm sick of it! For a brief moment there, it really seemed like critical race theory was gonna fade from the news cycle. I remember noticing it and thinking, oh, thank God. I won't have to make a video about this. But while I was slipping into a false sense of security, something weird was happening. Starting around March, a group of right-wing think tanks, all funded by the billionaire Koch family, began publishing piece after piece after piece about CRT, warning that critical race theory was infecting America's schools and indoctrinating kids with radical anti-American ideas. I don't mean a few clickbaity shitposts. I'm talking dozens of articles, podcasts, and web videos, all using the same language that Rufo had used in September. Rufo himself was featured in webinars by groups like the Heritage Foundation, ALEC, and the Manhattan Institute. It's hard to overstate just how weird this was. Most of these groups had never mentioned CRT before, but now it was all they could talk about. These articles came out in a trickle last year, but then suddenly became a flood. An average of 5 pieces per week dropped from late March to June 30th of 2021. In April, Rufo was actually hired by the Manhattan Institute to be the director of a new initiative on critical race theory. And a few weeks later, he published a briefing book, laying out the talking points the right would use to fight the spread of CRT in schools.
If people in these 14,000 school board districts don't have the courage to fight back, we're not going to win this fight.
What started off as one man's con had been adopted by the Koch brothers' massive propaganda machine. And pretty quickly, Fox News got the memo. If you look at these charts, you can actually see a link between when these think tanks start publishing their CRT pieces and when Fox News starts talking about it again. So by mid-spring, the panic over critical race theory was back, using the very talking points that Rufo had laid out in his briefing book.
These kids are not learning science, not learning mathematics, they're learning how to hate white people, they're learning how to hate their country.
What's happening in schools is they're trying to turn every kid into part of some identity group.
Divide the groups of children into oppressors and oppressed.
Speaking of deadly pathogens, critical race theory is spreading. A new website will tell you if it's in your kid's school.
Now, let's just get the obvious out of the way. No K-12 school on the planet is teaching anybody's kids critical race theory. The average American student does not even learn about slavery until 4th or 5th grade. The idea that kids are being taught a graduate level form of legal analysis is just I went through every example in this goddamn briefing book, and not a single one of them shows kids learning CRT. What they do show is schools teaching basic lessons about things like race and inequality, and then Rufo lying about those lessons to make them seem scarier than they actually are. This story about students being told to atone for their white privilege?
It never happened.
Bullshit. Debunked for months by local reporters and the school district. This story about students chanting to the Aztec god of human sacrifice?
It's a total fabrication.
More bullshit. Deemed largely false and misleading by fact checkers and the people who created the curriculum. Most of these stories don't even need a fact checker though. They fall apart if you just read the article. Rufo claims that students are being forced to celebrate Black communism, but his article literally just says they were asked to define communism during a lesson about Angela Davis. Rufo claims that students are being separated into oppressor and oppressed, but that oppressor and oppressed language does not come from any teacher or lesson plan. It comes from an anonymous parent who was complaining that their kid was being taught about identity. It's tempting to call this cherry picking, but these aren't even cherries. There's no theory that connects any of these stories together unless you think just talking about race is a theory, which is why when people on Fox try to define what CRT actually is, they end up sounding like this.
It's liberal mumbo jumbo for if you're white, you should be treated terribly. Basically, racist.
Incorrect, though I don't know what I was expecting from the guy who thinks you make lemonade by putting lemons directly into the blender. There also wasn't any evidence that these lessons were causing a lot of controversy. Many of the early complaints about CRT actually came from a couple of parents at a handful of elite New York private schools. Schools with names like Brearley, Grace Church, and Dalton. You know, places that really hate white people. Nothing says kill whitey like a lesson on race from the Dalton Academy Warblers. These parents were pissed that their kids were learning about systemic racism in the aftermath of the George Floyd protests, and started writing deranged emails to hundreds of other parents saying shit like, "We have not had systemic racism against blacks in this country since the 1960s. By adopting critical race theory, Brearley is advocating that blacks should forever be regarded as helpless victims. Black Lives Matter is a Marxist, anti-family, heterophobic, anti-Asian, and anti-Semitic organization." Now, is this funny? Yes. Is it camp? Absolutely. But is it newsworthy? For as long as schools have existed, there have been dumbass parents writing dumbass emails claiming that their precious angels are being indoctrinated. Who gives a shit that a couple of entitled dummies are upset about their kids' curricula? I'll tell you who gives a shit. Fox News gives a shit. Because pretty soon we're getting interview after interview with other parents claiming that their kids are being taught CRT too.
To tell them that they're bad people because of the color of their skin is sick, it's emotional abuse, and that's why we see people around the country standing up.
This wasn't just Rufo anymore. These are everyday moms and dads speaking up about the dangers of this radical woke ideology. But wait a second. Look at this woman's background. Creepy statue, Tea Party propaganda, a book called I Love Capitalism?
Wait a damn minute.
God damn it, that's not a concerned mom at all. That's Jennifer Stefano. vice president of the Commonwealth Foundation and former vice president of Americans for Prosperity. She works for the Koch brothers. That's not just a mother of 5. That's Carrie Lucas, a Koch brothers lapdog with ties to the Cato Institute and IWF. That's not just a Virginia father. That's Ian Pryor, a Republican comms person who spent his career working for Karl Rove and Jeff Sessions. Everywhere you look, these concerned parents turn out to be political operatives, doing the same bullshit as Rufo. This Florida mom, a Republican consultant who most recently worked for the RNC. This Virginia parent, longtime Republican activist who currently works at a GOP consulting firm. This Little League dad, former senior advisor to the Trump campaign who runs, you guessed it, another Republican consulting firm. But wait, I have more. This former school board member is a current activist for the Virginia GOP. This Florida mother of 3 is also a right-wing shitstarter and member of 7 different Florida GOP groups. This father of 3 is a pro-Trump podcaster who wants to sell you some of the ugliest CRT merch you have ever seen.
Holy Jesus.
Oh my god, what is that?
What is that?
Oh my god, what is that?
And before launching a Parents Against CRT group in January, this concerned mom was actually working for a bunch of Koch-funded think tanks, including Cato, FreedomWorks, and IDW. A fact that some of those think tanks are now trying their hardest to scrub from the internet. You can't hide from me, Nicole. I'm fucking crazy. The more you look into the panic over CRT, the more it looks like a classic case of astroturfing. A propaganda strategy in which a handful of billionaires pay a bunch of political operatives to create the illusion of a grassroots movement, which probably explains why so many of these early CRT stories came out of New York and Virginia. Because that's where the consultants live! But if the Tea Party taught us anything, it's that with enough money and Fox News coverage, even AstroTurf will start to grow. You can see that as Fox's coverage of CRT started to pick up again, so did public anxiety about it.
We've obviously created a movement here.
So before long, parents across the country start showing up to their local school board meetings to protest this scary theory they just heard about on TV.
I am against CTR. It's a divisive method which is going to actually divide people more than they already are.
What do you mean teaching race? What is there to teach about race? There is no systemic racism in this country, in this state, or in this country.
I think the Board of Education and those sitting on the panels are thieves. I think they're liars and have committed treason against our children. Stop indoctrinating our children.
Those kids.
Stop teaching our children to hate the police. Stop teaching our children that if they don't agree with the LGBT community, that they're homophobic.
Hold on, pause this shit.
Why can't we let the public know that you're teaching our children to go out and murder our police officers? Do you want the proof? I have the proof. And as long as I'm standing here on this good ground earth of God, I will fight. And this is not the last of me you will see. I'm retired. I have nothing else better to do.
Girl, we know. By the way, that woman absolutely got invited on Fox News, in case you're wondering if God is still dead. It goes without saying that most of the people at these protests have no idea what critical race theory actually is. They're just repeating what they saw on TV.
Can you name any critical race theory scholars?
Probably not.
Can you name any critical race theory concepts?
I don't know what the concepts are. I think I.
When did you first hear about critical race theory?
Sometime around last year.
Where'd you see it?
I'm on Fox News.
But even at these school board meetings, you can see evidence of bad faith shenanigans. This woman was described as a concerned teacher when she appeared on Fox, but she actually used to work at Right Side Broadcasting and is still listed as an activist partner at Turning Point USA. This woman was identified as a concerned mom after she spoke at her school board meeting, but she's actually a longtime political activist who hosts her own right-wing radio show. And then there's this guy. An Illinois father who became a viral sensation after his rant against CRT was tweeted out by Turning Point USA.
So when you talk about critical race theory, which is pretty much going to be teaching kids how to hate each other, you're going to purposely tell a white kid, oh, the black people are all down and suppressed. How do I have 2 medical degrees if I'm sitting here oppressed? How did I get, first of all,
Sure, that's not really how oppression works, and it's not what's being taught in school, and it's definitely not CRT, but you gotta admit, still sounds pretty compelling, right? If true. But he's not really a concerned parent, is he? He's a goddamn YouTuber who posts clickbaity reaction videos and who specifically recorded and uploaded himself because he knew it would go viral. He's a grifter. It's Meatloaf Girl all over again. It doesn't matter, because by this point, it's not just a Fox News story anymore. Now, local news outlets are showing up to these protests to ask about this critical race theory everyone's screaming about, publishing these vague headlines suggesting that something nefarious may be happening in a school district near you.
The district says it's an ethnic studies plan, but parents say, nope, it is a critical race theory plan.
These reporters don't know what CRT is either. So instead, you get these poor school district employees having to explain over and over again that they aren't teaching a graduate level legal theory.
Poway Unified School District is not teaching critical race theory.
We have said for months now, we are not teaching critical race theory in our schools.
We are not teaching critical race theory in K through 12. We are teaching kids to respect and value their diversity and the diversity of others.
It's too late. By midsummer, most of these protests aren't even about the curricula anymore. They're about school equity and diversity policies, which are policies aimed at helping minority students feel more welcome in majority white schools. In Kentucky, they're protesting a plan to hire more diverse teachers and carry more books with non-white characters.
They're trying to skirt under critical race theory, that they're not teaching it. They will be teaching it, but they're calling it the equity program.
In Georgia, they're protesting a plan to help minority students in the classroom and make sure they aren't being unfairly disciplined for behavioral issues.
The DEI program is a Trojan horse that will bring in critical race theory, white repentance, and the McDonaldization of America's students.
And in Virginia, they're protesting a student equity ambassador program to collect student complaints of racism and injustice, which came after kids said they were being called the N-word and threatened with having their hijabs ripped off their heads.
I think it is word salad. When you hear words like equitable, phrases like equitable outcomes, and it's you know, if it walks like a duck and acts like a duck, it's a duck. Quack, quack.
No decent human actually finds these policies to be controversial, but these people have been convinced that any attempt to even address racial inequality is just a cover for some nefarious anti-white agenda. And of course they think that. When no one can explain what critical race theory actually is, who's to say what critical race theory isn't?
Can you describe to me what critical race theory is?
So, in layman's terms, I don't have the academic definition up pulled up for you, but specifically like privilege plus power, whiteness, minorities, white traits of whiteness would be specifically like hard work, scheduling. I'll tell you this: the tenets of critical race theory. Though I've definitely done segments on the overt academic definition of it, I don't have it pulled up. But when they put out a list that says whiteness, they say things like "down with whiteness."
She doesn't know the words.
And it still doesn't matter. By the end of the summer, critical race theory has become an official Republican Party talking point.
Critical race theory.
Critical race theory.
Critical race theory.
Critical race theory is racism.
CRT starts showing up in Republican campaign ads. Dozens of school districts face GOP ballot initiatives to recall and remove their school boards. And over 24 states introduced legislation to ban the teaching of critical race theory in school.
Teaching kids to hate their country and to hate each other is not worth 1 red cent of taxpayer money.
The problem, of course, is that it's hard to ban something when you don't know what the hell it is. So these bills are all over the place. In Iowa, they've made it illegal to teach that someone is inherently racist or sexist based solely on the color of their skin. Literally nobody was teaching that, but okay. In Idaho, they've made it illegal to blame an individual white person for actions committed in the past by other white people. Again, that's not critical race theory, but go off, I guess. In South Dakota, they've introduced a bill that would ban lessons that promote the overthrow of the government of the United States. Try and stop me. Most of these laws, though, are a lot less funny. In Montana, teachers are now banned from teaching lessons that promote controversial concepts such as racial privilege and identity. In Wisconsin, they've introduced a bill that would limit the teaching of concepts like, I shit you not, anti-racism, cultural awareness, equity, marginalized communities, patriarchy, racial justice, social justice, and systems of power and oppression. And in my garbage home state of Florida, schools are now banned from teaching that racism is embedded into American society or legal systems, and must instead teach that American history is the story of a new nation based largely on the universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. I could scream forever about how fucking ironic this all is. How the party of Don't Tread on Me is now the party that wants to make sure no one dares speak ill of Big Brother. How the facts don't care about your feelings crowd now wants to ban lessons that might hurt white parents' feelings. And how the same dipshits who complain about cancel culture and the thought police are now cheering on laws that are so draconian that teachers are canceling their lessons on race out of a fear of a government crackdown. But what's the point? If you still think conservatives actually give a shit about free speech, you are either a Joe Rogan fan or a CNN employee. Either way, it's too late for you. The bigger point is that none of this has anything to do with fighting some radical left-wing theory. As actual critical race theorist David Theo Goldberg wrote, CRT functions for the right today primarily as an empty signifier for any talk of race and racism at all. A catch-all specter lumping together multiculturalism, wokeism, anti-racism, and identity politics. Or indeed any suggestion that racial inequities in the United States are anything but fair outcomes, the result of choices made by equally positioned individuals in a free society. When I first read this quote, I was like, damn, empty signifier? I'm gonna use that in the video. But it turns out I don't need to, because Rufo basically just admitted it on Twitter. We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all of the various cultural insanities under that brand category. The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans. Oh my god, he admitted it. This was never about critical race theory. They just needed a boogeyman. Some race-baity catchphrase they could use to scare white people with. All of this screaming, all of this divisive bullshit, and for what? For what? Oh shit, the meatloaf. If you asked a sociologist, they'd probably describe the freakout over critical race theory as a moral panic. A situation in which the public is tricked into overreacting to something that isn't actually dangerous. Imagine the Salem witch trials, but if Fox News were covering them.
It's civilization-ending poison, but it's everywhere. How widespread is it? Well, we can't really be sure.
Like the witch trials, the point of a moral panic is not to warn the public about a real threat. It's to manipulate them, to take advantage of their fear and anxiety to get what you really want. So what do the people lying about critical race theory really want? For a lot of these grifters, it's attention. I've joked a lot about Meatloaf Girl this video, mainly because she's an icon, she's an idiot, and she is the moment. But also because I think she represents the motivations behind a lot of the bad actors in this story. If you're trying to draw attention to your YouTube channel, your consulting firm, or your vile Substack, Moral Panics offer a great way to get yourself in front of a large, triggered audience. I can roast Meatloaf Girl all I want, but she went from a few thousand subscribers to over 45K when she started posting about CRT. Mr. Clickbait over here was already a pretty decent-sized YouTuber, but he's enjoyed a nice bump of about 20K subscribers since his rant went viral. I'm not jealous, I just want to die. There's always a market for stirring up racial anxiety. And if you're a non-white person willing to say what rich conservatives want to hear, even better. Actually, let's check in with Meatloaf Girl and see what she's up to now.
Hit the like button, subscribe if you aren't already subscribed to see more videos exposing the darkness of woke mentality.
Holy shit, that's depressing. Her YouTube transformation is complete. For the professional grifters, your Shapiros, your Owens, your Pools, the rationale is basically the same. These people have made a career of saying what their audience wants to hear and saying it every single day. So they kind of have to agree with whatever moral panic is popping off, even if they haven't done the reading. Shapiro is an especially sad example of this because he went to Harvard Law, the birthplace of critical race theory. He absolutely studied CRT as a student and knows how ridiculous this all is. But if he says that, his audience will turn on him. And more importantly, he won't get invited on Bill Maher to agree that all of this race stuff is really tearing the country apart.
If critical race theory means making children in school fixate on race,
I'm not for that. If it's about dividing everybody into oppressed and oppressor, I'm not for that. So there are things that are being taught and are going around that I'm not for, that if that was critical race theory, I wouldn't be for.
Oh my God, how do you host a political talk show and not even Google the topic before the show starts? New rule. Don't have sex with anyone who watches Bill Maher. I don't care how hot they are. Do not cross the Dickett line. Now, to be fair, not everyone lying about CRT is doing it for attention. They're also doing it for the money. Rufo has gotten a very nice career bump from all this. He's got a cushy new think tank job, a donations page to fund his fight against critical race theory, and he's become Fox News' resident expert on the thing he made up. Quite the haul. And apparently, he's not alone. Critical race theory has become a fixture in right-wing fundraising emails for both politicians and think tanks alike. And NBC reports that local political action groups have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars campaigning against school boards that talk about racial justice. As one of the attorneys suing a school district over CRT told a reporter, "This is a new area where people think they can either become famous or make money on the issue." And they're probably right. Good lord. This video should just be called Screaming the Quiet Part Out Loud. Speaking of which, I should probably also acknowledge that many of the people lying about CRT are doing it because they are just racists. Like, Tucker Carlson is a soulless grifter, sure, but he is also a sincere bigot who wants a white ethno-state. And I don't want to downplay the ideology that motivates people like him. But behind these grifters, behind Tucker and Rufo and Shapiro, there are these goddamn billionaires. Corporate oligarchs, oil barons, and Republican kingmakers who've spent lots of time and money trying to make sure that you're afraid of critical race theory. What's in it for them? And for that, I give you Derek Bell, the father of critical race theory, who saw this coming nearly 30 years ago.
Racism, ever since slavery, has provided this stabilizing influence. It is what those on top have used to keep those on the bottom, if not satisfied, at least quiescent. And it works very well, Charlie. It works very well.
It's hard not to notice that the panic over critical race theory really only started after Republicans lost control of Congress and the White House. As the party that had done nothing for 4 years but pass tax cuts for corporations, give away billions to weapons and oil companies, and cut government aid during a pandemic, suddenly found itself out of power with no serious policy agenda to speak of. Moral panics, and especially moral panics about race, are a reliable way to win back voters, to convince them that you're on their side even when all you've done is sell them out. And you can actually see this strategy going all the way back to the fight over busing.
President Nixon believes busing is wrong.
It's wrong for the white children, it's wrong for the black children. It will have the effect of creating hatreds among the kids.
In 1970, before the Supreme Court made its decision in Detroit, Richard Nixon's political strategist explained how Republicans needed to use racial anxiety to convince white Democrats to vote against their own interests. For a long time, the liberal-conservative split was on economic issues. That favored the Democrats. In the future, the liberal-conservative division will come on social issues. Will there be a continuation of bureaucratic do-gooder interference, symbolized by the school busing issue? The more Negroes who register as Democrats in the South, the sooner the Negrophobe whites will quit the Democrats and become Republicans. Without that prodding from the blacks, the whites will backslide into their old, comfortable arrangement with the Democrats.
I've always been against the busing of little children to achieve a racial balance, and I always will be. Let's keep our children in their own neighborhoods where they belong.
You can really see this strategy if you look at old Republican campaign ads. Look how quickly this guy pivots from talking about busing to talking about cutting social services.
There are many differences between my opponent and myself. One is busing. Mondale's for busing, Phil Hansen's against it. Mondale's for more and more government programs. I say no.
The same thing happened in the 80s. As Reagan was working to cut taxes for the ultra-rich and make radical cuts to government programs for the working class, his aide explained how Republicans used racial bullshit to sell trickle-down economics to white Americans.
You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. So obviously sitting around saying, we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, is much more abstract than even the busing thing. and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger.
Boy, am I glad I did not have to read that quote myself. Don't worry, that aide was chased out of Republican politics soon after that. And by that, I of course mean he became chairman of the Republican National Committee.
We are fortunate to have someone of Lee's perception leading the Republican Party. He is now involved in trying to elect Republicans all over the country.
One of those Republicans he helped elect was George Bush, who ended up hiring him as his campaign manager and who won his election thanks to an ad that used images of a black criminal to stoke white fears about law and order.
And we see our politicians use it all the time. Our president got elected notwithstanding the tremendous gaps in wealth and income. The needs for health care weren't even serious issues last time, because he talked about Willie Horton. And Willie Horton was the 1988 keyword that everybody understood. Now, what are the Republicans going to use for the keyword in 92? We're not sure, but they will have one.
They sure will. Republicans are already working to make CRT a centerpiece of the 2022 midterm elections, part of a broad strategy to run on culture war issues rather than campaigning head-on against Mr. Biden's economic agenda, which has proved popular with voters.
Republican candidates are betting this is connecting with voters of all political backgrounds. The first test will be here in Virginia in the governor's race in November.
It's genuinely soul-crushing to watch this happening over and over again. To watch billionaires and their lapdogs win election after election using the same old racial bullshit to divide and conquer. It's just... feels so hopeless. But you know, there is a way out of this, free thinker. A way to break the cycle, to connect racial justice and economic justice once and for all. It's been here the whole time. It's the old one. After all, what happened in Detroit is not just a story about race, it's also a story about class. About how the wealthy abandon the poor, and how the lack of funding for schools and affordable housing can keep working class people trapped in cycles of poverty that last for generations.
We should have national resources being poured in, but right now there's just a level of indifference.
That statistic about racial disparities in drug arrests isn't just about racist cops. It's also about how the privileged get to play by a different set of rules in this country, and how police departments often target neighborhoods they know can't afford to defend themselves in court. That report about racial disparities in the tax code is literally also a report about how our economic system caters to those who are already wealthy, and how the ruling class manipulates the law in order to avoid paying their fair share.
As so often is the case, the problems that minorities are complaining about are dramatic instances of injustices that are visited across much of the population based on class.
Critics accuse CRT of being obsessed with race, but the whole point of CRT is that focusing on race alone is not enough. As long as America's institutions allow the powerful to exploit the powerless, that exploitation will have a racial component. And that awareness can lead to some dangerously free thinking. Kimberly Crenshaw, one of the founders of CRT, went on to coin the term intersectionality, which is the idea that categories like racial inequality and economic inequality cannot be fully separated. They often reinforce each other. So while segregated school districts, for example, are bad for black and brown kids, they are also bad for young people, retirees, and workers, who quickly find themselves getting priced out of fancy white suburbs. And while the collapse of labor unions hurts all workers, it especially hurts black and brown workers, who are uniquely at risk for employment discrimination. It's not a coincidence that the states that have banned critical race theory are the same states with the lowest minimum wage rates and the weakest unions. Because while immigrants, people of color, and working class whites are exploited in different ways and for different reasons, they are often exploited at the hands of the same powerful elites and have reason to look out for each other, to treat racial justice and economic justice as part of the same struggle. And maybe that is why billionaires are so intent on banning critical race theory, banning anything that gets you to think about systems of power or question whether America is really as free and fair as they tell you it is. Not because CRT divides us, but because to be honest about what happens to black and brown people in this country is to become aware of all the ways the deck can be stacked against you. To begin considering the ways that you too might be playing a rigged game, and to imagine viewing each other not as enemies in an endless fake culture war, but as potential allies. co-conspirators, or most dangerously of all, dining partners. Hey. What? Don't get cringy. Fine. You know what? Believe whatever the hell you want. I grow tired of these free thinkers. Their Substacks. Keep listening to Ben Shapiro complain about the Aztec god of human sacrifice and then wonder why nothing ever changes. It's a free country. And while I have genuinely given this my best shot, my blood sugar is getting low. So this is the end of the video. Godspeed, join a union, and bon appetit.
Racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power. Now, when we come to Washington, we're coming to get our check.
Is that right? Is this the front? That feels worse. I've had her for not even a day and she's looking rough. I searched online for Ariana Grande wig and this is what I got. Does this say Ariana Grande to you? Does this say Hot Princess to you? It's not bad. It's not bad. It's cursed. I look like a non-playable character. Hi, I'm Brenda, the extremely tall one. No one can find Katie anywhere. So, it needs a necklace. It does need a necklace. Okay. I'm done with this one.